June 9, 1944, 3 days after D-Day. Adolf Hitler sat in his war room staring at a telegram. The message was from his most trusted spy in England, a man the Germans called Arabelle, the British called Garbo. And what this telegram said would change everything. It claimed that the Normandy invasion, the one that had just happened, the one with 150,000 Allied troops storming the beaches, wasn't real. It was a diversion. The real invasion was coming at Calais. 150 miles away, Hitler read this message. He believed every single word, and he made a decision that would lose him the war. He ordered his Panzer divisions already on the road to reinforce Normandy. To turn around, those tanks never made it to Normandy. The Allies secured the beachhead, and 6 weeks later they broke out and began the liberation of Europe. All because one man convinced Hitler that the biggest invasion in human history was fake. Here's the thing, though. That man, Agent Garbo, wasn't a trained spy. He wasn't even British. He was a Spanish chicken farmer who'd failed at every single thing he'd ever tried in his life. He had no military training. He spoke broken English. He'd been rejected by British intelligence 4 times. So he did something insane. He went to the Nazis instead, convinced them he was their spy, and went back to the British and said, "Now will you hire me?" And for the next 3 years, this nobody, this failure, this man who couldn't even run a hotel successfully, became the greatest double agent in history. He created an army of 27 fake spies that didn't exist. He invented battles that never happened. He made the German high command dance like puppets. And they loved him so much, they gave him the Iron Cross. This is the story of Juan Pujol García, the man who saved D-Day by lying better than anyone in history. And what makes it even crazier, he did most of it from a library in Lisbon, using a tourist guidebook and a train schedule. When we talk about World War II, we focus on the big moments, the battles, the generals, the turning points. But wars aren't won by battles alone. They're won by deception. By making your enemy look the wrong way at the exact right moment. And nobody understood this better than Juan Pujol García. Most people have never heard of him, but historians now say he might have shortened World War II by years. General Eisenhower called the D-Day deception operation, which Garbo led, quote, priceless. MI5, British intelligence, said that Germany's intelligence network in Britain during the war consisted entirely of Garbo's fake agents. The Germans had no other spies in Britain, none, because they thought Garbo's network was so good they didn't need anyone else. Think about that. One man convinced the entire German intelligence apparatus that they had eyes and ears all over England, when in reality they had nothing. But here's what makes Juan Pujol's story so fascinating. He wasn't supposed to be a spy. He was born in Barcelona in 1912 to a middle-class family. His father owned a dye factory. His childhood was comfortable, but unremarkable. He went to boarding school, hated it, dropped out, tried to become a chicken farmer, failed at that. He tried to manage a cinema, failed at that too. He tried to run a hotel. Same result. By 1941, when he decided to become a spy, Juan Pujol García was 29 years old and had failed at literally everything he'd attempted. His wife was frustrated with him. His family thought he was a dreamer. He had no prospects, no skills that anyone wanted. But he had one thing, an imagination so powerful, so detailed, so convincing that he could make people believe absolutely anything. And when World War II broke out, when he saw Nazi Germany steamrolling across Europe, something inside him clicked. He hated fascism. He'd seen it up close during the Spanish Civil War, where he'd played both sides just to survive. He decided he wanted to fight the Nazis, not with guns. He hated violence. But with lies, he would become a spy. The only problem? Nobody wanted him to understand how Juan Pujol became Garbo. You need to understand the Spanish Civil War, because that's where he learned that the truth is flexible, and survival depends on who you're talking to. In 1936, when the war broke out, Spain split into two sides, the Republicans backed by the Soviet Union, and the Nationalists backed by Nazi Germany. Juan wanted nothing to do with either side. He hated communism, he hated fascism. He just wanted to be left alone. But in a civil war, neutrality isn't an option. The Republicans drafted him, so he deserted. He hid at his girlfriend's parents' house for weeks. When he was finally caught, he talked his way out of it, convinced them he was sympathetic to their cause, got assigned to a non-combat role. Then he deserted again, crossed into nationalist territory, convinced them he'd been a prisoner of the Republicans, joined their side. Then he deserted from them too. For 3 years, Juan Pujol played both sides, forging documents, creating fake identities, lying to everyone, and he never fired a single shot. He later said, quote, "I learned that with the right story, you can walk through any door." By the time the war ended in 1939, Juan had developed a very specific skill set. He could lie with absolute conviction. He could create fictional identities that seemed real, and he could read people well enough to know exactly what they wanted to hear. These skills made him terrible at normal jobs, but perfect for espionage. In January 1941, Juan walked into the British embassy in Madrid. He told them he wanted to spy for Britain. He hated the Nazis. He wanted to help defeat them. The British said no. They thought he was a wannabe, probably a German plant. They didn't even interview him properly. Juan tried again in February, same result. He tried a third time. They told him to stop wasting their time. Now most people would have given up, gone back to their failed businesses and mediocre life. But Juan Pujol wasn't most people. He thought, fine, if the British won't hire me because I don't have experience, I'll get experience. So in July 1941, he walked into the German embassy in Madrid. The Germans were much easier to fool than the British. Juan told them he was a Spanish government official, fiercely pro-Nazi, who traveled frequently to London on diplomatic business. He said he wanted to help the Third Reich, wanted to spy for Germany, wanted to do his, quote, fascist duty. The Germans loved it. They gave him a crash course in espionage, taught him how to use invisible ink, how to create coded messages. They gave him £600, which in 1941 was about $42,000 in today's money, and they told him to go to London and start recruiting agents. There was one tiny problem. Juan Pujol didn't speak English. He'd never been to England, and his passport was fake. So he went to Lisbon, Portugal instead, and decided to pretend he was in London. Think about how insane this is. He's sitting in Lisbon, sending reports to the Germans claiming to be in London, a city he's never visited, describing events and places he's never seen, and his only sources? A blue guide travel book, old British newspapers, newsreels at the cinema, and a railway timetable. He started sending reports, German troop movements he claimed to have seen, British military installations he claimed to have visited. Some of it was completely made up. Some of it was based on outdated information from magazines, and the Germans believed all of it. Why? Because Juan's reports were detailed. They had the right tone. They sounded like they came from someone who was actually there. He described the weather in London, which he got from BBC radio broadcasts. He described pubs and streets, which he got from his guidebook. He even submitted expense reports for train travel, which he calculated using a British railway guide. The only mistake he made? British currency. At the time, Britain used pounds, shillings, and pence. 20 shillings to a pound, 12 pence to a shilling. It was a nightmare. Juan had no idea how to calculate his expenses in this system, so he just listed them and said he'd send the total later. The Germans didn't notice. Within months, Juan Pujol, sitting in a Lisbon apartment, had convinced German intelligence that he was running a spy network across Britain. He invented sub-agents, a Venezuelan in Glasgow, a pilot in the RAF, a Welsh nationalist, all completely fictional. He even killed off one of his fake agents, planted a fake obituary in a British newspaper, and the Germans sent condolences and a pension to the widow, who also didn't exist by early 1942. The Germans were paying Juan $340,000, in today's money about $6 million, to run a spy network that existed entirely in his imagination. And then something happened that changed everything. British intelligence started picking up chatter from German communications. They were talking about an agent in Britain, codename Arabelle, who was sending incredibly detailed reports. MI5 started investigating. Who was this Arabelle? How was he operating? They needed to find him and shut him down, except they couldn't find him, because he wasn't in Britain. Meanwhile, one tried once more to contact the British. This time, his wife Araceli went to the American embassy. Americans were more informal. Maybe they'd listen. She told them her husband was already working as a German spy, but he wanted to be a double agent. He wanted to help the Allies. The Americans passed the information to the British. MI5 sent an officer to interview Juan, and when they realized that Arabelle, the German super spy they'd been hunting, and this Spanish chicken farmer in Lisbon were the same person, they were stunned. This man with no training, no resources, just a guidebook and an imagination, had fooled German intelligence for months. In April 1942, MI5 brought Juan and his family to England. They gave him a new code name, Garbo, after Greta Garbo, because he was the greatest actor they'd ever seen. They assigned him a handler, Tomas Harris, a Spanish-speaking MI5 officer and art dealer, and together, Garbo and Harris would create the most elaborate deception in military history. When Garbo arrived in London, MI5 had a problem. The Germans already believed he had a small network of agents. If they suddenly disappeared, the Germans would get suspicious. So instead of shutting down Garbo's fictional network, they expanded it. Garbo and Harris sat down and started creating detailed biographies for each fake agent. Agent 1, a Portuguese commercial traveler in London. Agent 2, a Swiss businessman. Agent 3, a Venezuelan student in Glasgow who hated Britain. Agent 4, Fred, a waiter from Gibraltar. Agent 5, a Welsh nationalist who believed in Welsh independence. Agent 6, an American soldier. Agent 7, an Indian poet in Brighton. Eventually, they had 27 fictional agents, each with their own personality, background, motivations, and communication style. Some of these agents had sub-agents, so the network appeared even larger, and Garbo maintained all of them, writing hundreds of letters, sending thousands of messages, creating travel records, expense reports, meeting notes. It was like running 27 different Twitter accounts, each with their own voice and storyline, except the audience was the Third Reich, and the stakes were World War II. MI5 gave Garbo everything he needed. They toured England, finding hotels and pubs his fake agents could visit. They took photos of locations his agents might see. They even helped him create fake receipts. The Germans were drowning in information from Garbo's network. So much information that German intelligence in Spain stopped trying to recruit any other agents in Britain. Why would they? They already had the best, and here's the genius of it. Most of what Garbo sent was real. Garbo's reports were a carefully crafted mixture of truth and fiction. About 80% of what he sent was accurate. British troop movements, supply shipments, factory production, but, and this is critical, the information was either unimportant or it arrived too late to be useful. For example, in November 1942, the Allies were planning Operation Torch, the invasion of North Africa. MI5 decided to use Garbo to cement his credibility. They had him send a detailed report about the invasion fleet, where it was going, everything. But they delayed sending the message. It arrived in German hands just hours before the invasion began. Too late for the Germans to do anything about it. The Germans were impressed. They sent back a message saying, quote, "We're sorry your report arrived too late, but it was magnificent. You are our best source. This was the pattern. Give them real information when it doesn't matter. Give them fake information when it does." But maintaining this required incredible attention to detail. Garbo had to remember what each of his 27 fake agents knew. What they didn't know, where they were supposed to be. What they would realistically have access to. If Agent 3, the Venezuelan in Glasgow, reported seeing a naval shipment, it had to be something he could have realistically seen from Glasgow. Not something only someone in Portsmouth would know. Every report had to be consistent with that agent's character. Their location, their supposed job, it was like writing 27 different characters in a novel. Except the readers were Nazis, who would kill you if they caught you lying. Garbo worked 6 to 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, writing these reports. His wife Artheli was part of it too. She helped with the details, kept track of the storylines, reminded him of contradictions. Without her, the whole operation might have fallen apart. And then in 1943, the Allies started planning the biggest invasion in human history. And they needed Garbo to pull off the biggest lie ever told. By 1944, Hitler knew the Allies were coming. The question wasn't if they'd invade Europe. It was where, and the Allies had a problem. There were only 2 logical places to invade France, Normandy or the Pas de Calais. Normandy had longer beaches, better for landing troops. But it was farther from England. Calais was closer to England, just 20 miles across the Strait of Dover. And it was the shortest route to Germany. Hitler and his generals assumed it would be Calais. It made the most sense, but the Allies chose Normandy, specifically because the Germans expected Calais, which meant they needed to reinforce that expectation. They needed Hitler to be absolutely convinced the invasion was coming at Calais. So they created Operation Fortitude, the largest military deception in history. And at the center of it all was Garbo. They were about to ask him to convince Hitler that an invasion of 150,000 troops, thousands of ships and hundreds of planes was fake. And the scary part? If he failed, D-Day would fail, and hundreds of thousands of Allied soldiers would die on the beaches. No pressure. Operation Fortitude was insane. The Allies created an entire fake army, the first United States Army Group, or FUSAG. On paper, it was 1 million men, led by General George Patton, based in southeastern England directly across from Calais. In reality, it was inflatable tanks, fake landing craft made of wood and canvas, recordings of radio chatter, and a lot of very convincing lies from the air. German reconnaissance planes saw what looked like a massive invasion force preparing to launch. On the ground, Garbo's network of fake agents confirmed it. Between January 1944 and D-Day on June 6th, Garbo sent over 500 messages to the Germans, sometimes 20, in a single day. Agent 3 in Glasgow reported seeing divisions moving south. Agent 5 in Wales saw tank formations. Agent 7 in Brighton reported increased military activity. All of it pointed to one thing: the invasion would be at Calais. But here's where it gets really clever. The Allies knew that to maintain Garbo's credibility, he had to warn the Germans about D-Day. if he said nothing, if the invasion came as a complete surprise, the Germans would suspect their best agent had been turned, so they made a dangerous decision. Garbo would send a message warning about the Normandy invasion, but it would arrive too late on the night of June 5, 1944, hours before the invasion began. Garbo prepared to send his warning, but there was a problem. His German contact in Madrid wasn't there. The radio operator had gone to bed early. Garbo sat at his radio, trying to make contact, sending the signal again and again. For 3 hours, nothing. Finally, at 3 a.m., the operator came back online. Garbo sent his message. Urgent. Have learned from Agent 5 that something extremely important is about to happen. Possibly an invasion. We'll send more details as soon as possible. But by then, Allied troops were already in their landing craft crossing the English Channel. The message arrived at German intelligence at 8 a.m. on June 6th, hours after the first troops had hit the beaches. The Germans were furious, not at Garbo, but at their own radio operator. Why hadn't he been there to receive the message earlier? They sent Garbo an apology, and then Garbo sent the message that would change the war. June 9, 1944, 3 days after D-Day. The German High Command was in chaos. Should they send reinforcements to Normandy? Was this the real invasion? Hitler was torn. His instincts said yes, but some of his generals said, wait, what if this is a feint? At that exact moment, Garbo sent a message. It was long, detailed, and delivered with absolute confidence. He said that according to his network, Fusag was still in southeastern England. None of those divisions had participated in the Normandy invasion. He said that Normandy was obviously a diversion, designed to pull German troops away from Calais, the real invasion, the main force. The million-man army under Patton was still coming at Calais. Garbo ended the message with, quote, I trust you will give this message the consideration it deserves, as it represents the culmination of weeks of work by my agents. The message went to Berlin. It was decoded and placed on Hitler's desk. Hitler read it, and he believed it. He immediately sent orders to his Panzer divisions, which were already on the road to Normandy, to turn around and return to defensive positions at Calais. 2 elite armored divisions, the 1st SS Panzer and the 116th Panzer, which could have reached Normandy within 48 hours, stayed in place. They waited for an invasion that never came. For 7 weeks after D-Day, Hitler kept 19 infantry divisions and 2 armored divisions at Calais, waiting for Garbo's Phantom Army. By the time he realized the truth, the Allies had broken out of Normandy and were racing across France. Historians estimate that if those panzer divisions had reached Normandy in the first week, they could have pushed the Allies back into the sea. D-Day might have failed. The war might have lasted years longer, but they didn't, because Hitler believed a lie told by a Spanish chicken farmer. Now, here's where the story gets even crazier. Because after D-Day, you'd think Garbo's usefulness was over, right? The invasion had succeeded. The deception had worked. But no. The Germans trusted him more than ever. In July 1944, German intelligence sent Garbo a message. They apologized for not listening to him sooner. They said his reports had been priceless, and they told him they were recommending him for Germany's highest honor, the Iron Cross. On July 29, 1944, Adolf Hitler personally approved giving the Iron Cross to Agent Arabel, a Spanish spy who'd never set foot in Germany. For his outstanding service to the Third Reich, Garbo became one of the only people in history to receive military honors from both sides of a war. The British had already given him an MBE, Member of the Order of the British Empire, in recognition of his work. So Juan Pujol García, the failed chicken farmer? now had medals from both King George VI and Adolf Hitler. And the absurdity didn't stop there. After D-Day, MI5 kept Garbo's network running. The Germans still trusted him, still paid him, still believed his 27 agents were sending valuable intelligence. Garbo continued sending reports through the end of 1944, mostly feeding the Germans information about aid movements that either didn't matter or arrived too late. But by early 1945, it was clear Germany was losing. The Allies were closing in from the west. The Soviets from the east. It was only a matter of time. And Juan Pujol had a problem. What happens when the war ends? What happens when the Germans realize they've been fooled? Nazi intelligence officers knew his name, knew he existed, and when Germany fell, they'd be looking for revenge. So in 1945, before the war even ended, MI5 helped Juan fake his own death. The official story was that Juan Pujol García died of malaria in Angola in 1949. Some versions said it was a snakebite. Some said it was in Mozambique. The details were deliberately vague. The point was Agent Garbo was dead. Nobody should come looking for him. In reality, Juan, his wife Araceli, and their 3 children moved to Venezuela. They settled in Caracas. Wayne opened a small bookstore and taught English to employees of Shell Oil. He lived quietly, anonymously, for decades. His children didn't even know about his war work. They thought he'd just been a businessman who moved to South America. Araceli knew the truth, but she never spoke about it. Not even to her children, and for 39 years. The world thought Juan Pujol García was dead. Then, in 1984, something changed. A British author named Nigel West was researching double agents from World War II, and he kept hearing about this legendary agent called Garbo. But nobody knew Garbo's real name. It was still classified. West spent years tracking down former MI5 officers, trying to piece together the story. Finally, someone told him Garbo's real name was either Juan or José Garcia, a Spanish name, extremely common. West hired a research assistant to start calling every J. Garcia in the Barcelona phone book. Months of calls, dead ends, wrong numbers. And then, one day, they found Garbo's nephew, who said, "You're looking for my uncle. He's not in Spain. He's in Venezuela, and he's alive." In 1984, Nigel West flew to Caracas and knocked on Juan Pujol Garcia's door. Juan was 72 years old, living in a modest house. Still running his little bookstore, West introduced himself, explained he was writing a book about wartime double agents. Juan was shocked. After 39 years of silence, someone had found him. At first, he was hesitant. What if there were still Nazis out there looking for revenge? But West convinced him the war had been over for 40 years. It was time to tell the story. Juan agreed, and in 1985, he published his autobiography, Operation Garbo. The book was a sensation. Suddenly, the world learned about the greatest double agent of World War II, the man who'd tricked Hitler, the man who'd saved D-Day, was alive. The British government invited Juan to London. They organized a ceremony, reunited him with surviving MI5 officers. He visited the MI5 headquarters, saw the old files, the messages he'd sent, the reports his fictional agents had filed. It was surreal, like visiting a museum of your own lies. But there was sadness too. His wife Araceli, who'd been his partner in the entire operation, had divorced him years earlier. The stress of living and hiding, the failed businesses in Venezuela, the secrets, it had been too much. She'd remade her life, remarried, and when Juan resurfaced in the 1980s, she wanted nothing to do with it. She never published her story, never gave interviews, took her secrets to the grave when she died in 1990. Juan Pujol García died in Caracas in October 1988. Just 3 years after finally telling his story. He was 76 years old, and even in death, there was one more twist after Juan died. Historians started digging deeper into Operation Fortitude and Garbo's role in it. And the more they learned, the more remarkable it became. Documents declassified in the 1990s showed that during Operation Fortitude, 62 of Garbo's reports were included in German intelligence summaries sent directly to Hitler. The German High Command trusted Garbo's network more than any other intelligence source. When they debriefed German officers after the war, multiple generals said they'd kept divisions at Calais because of reports from the Spanish network. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, commander of German forces in Western Europe, specifically mentioned in his interrogation that intelligence from Britain had convinced him Normandy was a feint. That intelligence came from Garbo. Military historians now estimate that Operation Fortitude, and specifically Garbo's June 9th telegram, delayed German reinforcements to Normandy by at least 6 weeks. During those 6 weeks, the Allies went from barely holding the beachhead to breaking out and liberating France. If those panzers had arrived in week 1 instead of week 7, D-Day could have failed, which means everything that followed. The liberation of France, the defeat of Nazi Germany, the end of the Holocaust, might have happened differently or not at all. One man, with nothing but his imagination and a talent for lying, changed the course of human history. But here's what makes Juan Pujol Garcia's story truly unique. He wasn't doing it for money. The Germans paid him hundreds of thousands of dollars. But MI5 took half to cover operational costs, and Juan gave the rest away. He wasn't doing it for glory. He faked his death and lived in anonymity for 40 years. He wasn't even doing it out of patriotism. He wasn't British. He wasn't even fighting for his own country. He did it because, in his words, he hated tyranny and wanted to contribute to the good of humanity. And here's the final twist that makes this story perfect. Juan Pujol Garcia was a failure at everything normal. He couldn't hold down a regular job, couldn't run a successful business, couldn't even serve in the military without deserting multiple times. But in the very specific, very strange world of double-agent espionage, where lying was a virtue and imagination was a weapon, he was the greatest who ever lived. The man who'd failed at everything finally found the one thing he was born to do. Lie so convincingly that even Adolf Hitler believed him. Before you go, I want you to think about something. Juan Pujol Garcia should never have been a spy. He had no qualifications, no training, no connections. The British rejected him 4 times. By any reasonable standard, he was exactly the wrong person for the job. But he did it anyway. He forced his way in. He made them believe in him, and he ended up changing the world. How many times have you wanted to do something, but told yourself you're not qualified? You don't have the right background, the right education, the right connections? Juan Pujol didn't let any of that stop him. He looked at the greatest evil the world had ever seen and decided. With nothing but his imagination, he was going to fight it, and he won. So if you think stories like this deserve to be remembered, if you believe that ordinary people can do extraordinary things, then subscribe, because we're just getting started telling these stories. And here's my question for you. If you were in Juan's position, rejected 4 times with no experience, would you have had the audacity to go to the enemy first, just to prove yourself? Leave your answer in the comments. I genuinely want to know. Also, do you know other unknown heroes from World War II? People who changed history but nobody remembers. Drop their names below. Your suggestion might become our next video. Thanks for watching, and remember, the greatest achievements often come from the most unlikely people. Rest in peace, Juan Pujol Garcia, the chicken farmer who fooled Hitler.